Marcus Chen stopped dead in the corridor of HFY 3, his maintenance tablet nearly slipping from his fingers. Through the observation window of the guest quarters, he saw something that made absolutely no sense. 3 alien visitors from the Veloran delegation were sleeping in the common area, curled up on cushions in the afternoon light streaming through the viewport, looking for all the world like peaceful, delicate creatures without a care in the universe. But beneath them, barely visible in the flooring seams, were the thick black lines of reinforcement plating. The kind of plating they used in the cargo bays. The kind designed to hold 40 tons per square meter. Why in God's name would a sleeping quarters need that kind of support? Marcus had been the station's structural engineer for 3 years, and he'd personally signed off on hundreds of habitat modifications, but he'd never questioned this one when it came through 6 months ago. The work order had simply said Veloran cultural requirements, and he'd assigned it to his team without a second thought. Now, watching the smallest of the 3, a young woman named Sera, shift slightly in her sleep, her silver hair catching the light like spun moonlight, he felt a cold prickle of confusion run down his spine. She couldn't have weighed more than 50 kilos soaking wet, could she? The question gnawed at him through the rest of his shift. Marcus pulled up the original work order on his tablet, scanning through the technical specifications. Reinforcement plating, grade 9. Structural support beams, triple layered. Fasteners rated for high-stress environments. It was the same specs they'd used when they converted a section of the station into a heavy equipment repair bay. He cross-referenced the Veloran delegation files, but they were sparse, just basic diplomatic information and cultural notes about privacy preferences and diet. Nothing about why they'd need floors that could support a small spacecraft. He was still puzzling over it when his cum badge chirped. "Chen, we've got a situation in HFY 3, his supervisor's voice crackled. "The Veloran quarters. One of the support indicators is showing yellow. Can you check it out?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. Yellow meant the supports were under stress, approaching their tolerance thresholds. "On my way," he replied, already moving. When he arrived at the quarters, the delegation's liaison, a nervous human diplomat named Peters, was waiting outside, wringing his hands. "Please be discreet," Peters whispered urgently. "We can't alarm them." "The Veloran delegation is critical for the mining treaty negotiations," Marcus nodded, pulling out his diagnostic scanner. "What exactly should I be worried about?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Peters glanced at the door, then back at Marcus. "Just be careful, and whatever you do, don't startle them awake." There was something in the man's eyes, something that looked like genuine fear, that made Marcus's pulse quicken. He was an engineer, for crying out loud. What could possibly be dangerous about some sleeping delegates? He keyed in his maintenance override code and stepped inside, scanner in hand. The room was quiet, filled with the soft sound of breathing. Sera was alone now, curled on her side on a large cushion near the viewport, one hand tucked under her cheek. She looked absolutely peaceful, her delicate features relaxed in sleep, the slight point of her ears just visible through her hair. She wore comfortable-looking gray lounge clothes that somehow managed to look both casual and elegant. Marcus felt something unexpected twist in his chest. He'd seen her before in passing, had even exchanged a few polite words in the commissary, but he'd never really looked at her. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost fragile, like porcelain come to life. He forced himself to focus on the scanner, moving slowly across the room, tracking the stress readings in the floor. The numbers made him blink and look again. The section of floor where Sera lay was reading 82% of maximum load tolerance. For grade 9 reinforcement plating, that was impossible. He moved closer, recalibrating the scanner, certain there was a malfunction. The device beeped softly, and Sera's eyes fluttered open. Marcus froze. Her eyes were the color of Arctic ice, pale blue with hints of silver, and for a moment they were clouded with sleep. Then they focused on him, and he saw awareness snap into them, followed immediately by something that looked like panic. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quickly, holding up his hands. "Maintenance check. Didn't mean to wake you." Sera sat up slowly, gracefully, and Marcus's scanner screamed an alert. The floor stress jumped to 91%. She was moving, shifting her weight, and the reinforced floor was groaning under the pressure. "You're reading the supports," she said softly, and it wasn't a question. Her voice had a musical quality, but there was resignation in it that made Marcus's heart ache for reasons he didn't understand. "I don't understand," Marcus said honestly, looking from the scanner to her. The readings don't make sense. Sera stood up, and Marcus heard it. Then, really heard it for the first time. The solid, heavy thunk of her feet on the decking. Not the soft pad of bare feet or the light step of someone her size. It sounded like someone had dropped 2 bags of concrete. The floor stress indicator flickered and then settled at 78%. She was standing now, her full weight distributed across a slightly larger area, and the floor was still struggling. How much do you weigh? The question came out before Marcus could stop it, blunt and graceless, and he immediately winced. I'm sorry, that was incredibly rude. At just 463 kilograms, Sera said quietly, wrapping her arms around herself. Give or take, depending on how much I've eaten. She said it matter-of-factly, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. The reinforcement plates are necessary. We tried regular floors on the first station we visited. I fell through to the deck below while I was sleeping. The world tilted slightly for Marcus. 463 kilograms, over 1,000 pounds. This woman, who looked like she might blow away in a strong wind, weighed as much as a small spacecraft. Veloran Prime, she continued, still not looking at him, has 4.7 times the gravity of Earth. We evolved there. Our bones, our muscles, our cellular structure, everything about us is incredibly dense. It's why we look the way we do to you. Marcus saw her jaw tighten. Delicate, fragile. Meanwhile, we're terrified of accidentally killing someone every time we shake hands. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. And suddenly Marcus understood the careful way she moved. The deliberate slowness he'd noticed in all the Veloran delegates. They weren't being ceremonial or alien strange. They were being desperately careful. The mining treaty, Marcus said slowly, pieces clicking together. You're not negotiating to mine our asteroids. We're negotiating to mine yours. Sera finally looked at him, and there was a sad smile on her face. Our asteroids, our moons, our deep core minerals. Everything on Veloran weighs so much that our spacecraft can barely achieve escape velocity. We've been stuck in our system for centuries, watching the stars and knowing we'd never reach them. Not alone. She gestured to the window, to the vast expanse of space beyond. Your species is light. You can dance among the stars with a fraction of the fuel we'd need. We're hoping you'll help us do the same. Show me, Marcus said suddenly. Sera tilted her head, confused. Show you what? Your strength. Your real self. I want to understand. He wasn't sure why it mattered so much, but it did. He'd spent his whole life working with forces and masses, with load-bearing calculations and structural integrity. This woman was walking physics miracle, and he needed to see it, to really comprehend it. Sera studied him for a long moment, those ice-blue eyes searching his face for something. Then she walked to the corner of the room where a small table stood, a decorative thing made of brushed steel and maybe weighing 20 kilos. She picked it up with one hand, casual as picking up a coffee cup, and held it out to him. This feels like paper to me, she said. Then she set it down and placed her palm flat on top of it. She pressed down, and the metal groaned, then crumpled like tinfoil, compressed under her hand until the table was half its original height, a crushed sculpture of twisted steel. She stepped back, breathing hard, not from exertion, but from emotion. This is why we move slowly around your people, she whispered. This is why we have special quarters, and why we eat alone, and why I haven't touched another person without gloves in the 6 months I've been on this station. Her hands were shaking. Do you know what it's like to be so terrified of your own body that you can't even accept a hug? The raw vulnerability in her voice cracked something open in Marcus's chest. He'd spent years thinking about structures and supports, about how much weight things could bear. But he'd never considered what it might be like to be the weight, to be the danger, to have to calculate every movement for fear of causing harm. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it. That sounds incredibly lonely. Sera laughed, but it was a broken sound. You have no idea. On Veloran, I was normal. I was just another person. I could hug my family, play with children, dance without worrying about crushing my partner's feet to powder. Here, I'm a monster in a pretty package. You're not a monster, Marcus said firmly. Sera gave him a skeptical look. I weigh half a ton. I could kill you by accident if I tripped and fell on you. What would you call it? Powerful, Marcus said. Different. Extraordinary. He gestured to the crushed table. Do you know how much force that took? Your people are walking miracles of evolution. You're adapted to survive conditions that would crush me in seconds. That's not monstrous. That's incredible. Something shifted in Sera's expression, a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. Your supervisor warned you not to startle me awake, she said. Do you know why? Marcus shook his head. Because the one time someone did, I sat up fast and punched them reflexively. Just a startled reaction, the kind anyone might have. I broke 4 of his ribs and fractured his sternum. She looked down at her hands. I couldn't sleep for a month after that. I kept thinking about how easily it happened, how little control I had. But you didn't mean to, Marcus said. Intent matters. Does it? Sera asked. If I accidentally kill someone, do my good intentions bring them back? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and unanswerable. Marcus thought about his work, about all the safety systems and redundancies he built into his designs. You know what engineers do, he said finally. We build supports. We calculate loads and stresses, and we create structures that can handle them. Not because the weight is wrong or bad, but because it exists and deserves to be supported. He met her eyes. You're not a problem to be solved, Sera. You're just someone who needs the right support system. Sera's eyes shimmered, and Marcus realized with a start that she was fighting tears. No one has ever put it that way before, she said softly. They stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling around them like the station's gentle rotation. Then Marcus's tablet beeped. The stress indicator had dropped to 75%. Sera had shifted her weight without realizing it, moving into a more balanced stance. I need to reinforce this section more, Marcus said, checking the readings. You shouldn't have to worry about the floor. Not here. You don't have to do that, Sera said. Yes, I do, Marcus replied. It's my job, and, he hesitated, then pushed forward. I'd like to do it right. Which means I need to understand Veloran requirements better. Would you be willing to help me? Maybe over coffee in the commissary? Sera looked at him, surprised. You want to have coffee with me? I want to have coffee with you, Marcus confirmed. Unless you think I'm being too forward. I promise my intentions are professional. He paused. Well, mostly professional. Maybe 60% professional. That got a real smile from her, small but genuine. I can't drink coffee, she said. It would be like drinking syrup for you to dense. But I could have tea while you have coffee. It's a date then, Marcus said, and then immediately stumbled over his words. I mean, a meeting. A professional meeting. Unless you'd want it to be a date, in which case, Marcus, Sera interrupted, and there was warmth in her voice now, actual warmth. I would like to have tea with you. We can figure out what to call it later. Over the next 3 weeks, tea became a regular thing. Marcus learned that Velorans had a wicked sense of humor about their density. That Sera in particular loved earth poetry because it was full of metaphors about lightness and floating that were utterly alien to her experience. He learned that she'd been a dancer on her homeworld, and that she missed it desperately, the feeling of moving without constant calculation. He told her about growing up on Luna, about the low gravity that had made him clumsy when he first came to standard G stations, about feeling like his body never quite fit the space it occupied. They found common ground in being displaced, in adapting to environments that weren't made for them. And slowly, carefully, they became friends. More than friends, if Marcus was honest with himself. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering what she'd think of something, looking forward to their next conversation with an eagerness that had nothing to do with engineering. The station crew noticed. You're spending a lot of time with the Veloran delegation, his supervisor mentioned one day, not quite casually. Just making sure the habitat modifications are working properly, Marcus replied, knowing he wasn't fooling anyone. Is that all? Peters, the diplomat, asked with a knowing smile, when he saw them having tea for the 5th time that week. Marcus didn't have a good answer for that. The truth was complicated. How did you date someone who could accidentally kill you? How did you build a relationship across not just cultural differences, but fundamental physical ones? He was still wrestling with these questions when the accident happened. Marcus was working in the maintenance tunnel beneath Habring 3, reinforcing the supports for Sera's quarters. He'd designed a new system, more elegant and with a higher safety margin, and he was installing it personally. He'd just finished securing one of the main support beams when he heard the crack. It was a sound every engineer dreads, the sharp report of structural failure. The temporary brace he'd set up gave way, and suddenly 3 tons of decking and support structure was falling directly toward him, Marcus had exactly enough time to think that this was a stupid way to die when something hit him like a freight train, driving him sideways across the tunnel. He slammed against the wall, the breath knocked out of him, and then there was a sound like thunder. He looked up, dazed, to see Sera standing where he'd been a second before, her arms raised above her head, holding the collapsed section of flooring. Her whole body shook with effort, her face twisted in concentration, her feet literally embedded in the deck plating beneath her, pressed down by the enormous force. "Get out," she gritted through clenched teeth. "Now." Marcus scrambled backward, his ribs screaming where she'd hit him. Sera took a step, then another, her feet punching through the decking with each movement, carrying the multi-ton load toward the support wall. With a roar of effort, she heaved the entire mass upward and sideways, slamming it against the wall, where it crashed in a cacophony of bent metal and sparks. Then she dropped to her knees, gasping. "Are you insane?" Marcus shouted, his fear coming out as anger, as he rushed to her. "You could have been crushed." Sera looked up at him, and incredibly, she was laughing. "Marcus, I'm from a 4.7G world. That was maybe uncomfortable. You, on the other hand, would have been paced." She stood up, and he saw that her hands were scraped raw, the only injury she'd sustained from catching several tons of falling debris. "Are you okay?" she asked, and there was such genuine concern in her eyes that Marcus felt something break loose in his chest. "You saved my life," he said, wonderfully. "You moved so fast. I didn't even see you. And you actually caught the entire floor section." "I told you," Sera said softly, stepping closer, though still maintaining careful distance. "We're very dense, very strong. It's useful sometimes, even if it's terrifying others." She looked down at her scraped palms. "I didn't hurt you too badly when I pushed you. I tried to be gentle, but there wasn't much time to calculate." Marcus closed the distance between them, his heart pounding. "Sera, you were amazing. You saved my life without hesitation, even though getting close to me scares you. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." "I wasn't scared," Sera said, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Not of hurting you. I was scared of being too late." They stood there, close enough that Marcus could see the silver flecks in her eyes, the slight luminescence of her skin that he'd learned was a Veloran trait. Close enough to touch, but not touching, the space between them charged with everything and said, "I want to hold your hand," Marcus said quietly. "I've wanted to for weeks, but I don't know how to ask for something that scares you." Sera's breath hitched. "It does scare me," she admitted. "Every time I think about it, I imagine all the ways it could go wrong. You're so fragile to me, Marcus. So light and soft and breakable." She raised one hand, holding it up between them. "But I want to try. If you trust me, I trust you," Marcus said without hesitation. He raised his own hand, positioning it palm to palm with hers, not quite touching. "We'll do it together." Slowly, Sera nodded, and Marcus saw her take a deliberate breath, centering herself the way she'd told him Velorans were trained to do from childhood. Then slowly, with infinite care, she pressed her palm to his. Her skin was warm, smooth, and Marcus could feel the incredible tension in her hand, the way she was controlling every single muscle to maintain exactly the right amount of pressure. It was like holding hands with a barely restrained force of nature, and it was wonderful. "Hi," he said, smiling. "Hi," she replied, and then she laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. "I'm holding your hand." "You are," Marcus confirmed. "And I'm not broken." "Not yet," Sera said, but she was smiling now, really smiling. "Don't make me laugh too hard, or I might squeeze." They stood there in the damaged maintenance tunnel, hands pressed together, and Marcus thought that this was probably the strangest and most perfect moment of his life. The investigation into the collapse revealed that the temporary bracing had been sabotaged, though they never found out by whom. Someone, it seemed, didn't want the Veloran delegation to feel welcome. But the incident had an unexpected effect. When the station crew heard how Sera had saved Marcus, the fear that had kept them distant evaporated. People started greeting the Velorans in the corridors, inviting them to social events, treating them like colleagues instead of dangerous unknowns. The mining treaty negotiations concluded successfully, establishing a partnership that would benefit both species for generations. The Velorans would provide resources and unique engineering perspectives shaped by their high-gravity environment. Humans would provide spacecraft and the ability to explore the stars. It was a fair exchange, built on mutual respect and understanding. But for Marcus and Sera, the real treaty was more personal. They created their own protocols, their own ways of being together. Sera learned to trust her control, and Marcus learned to trust her. They walked through the station's observation decks, not holding hands every time, but sometimes, when Sera felt confident and Marcus felt brave. They had tea in the commissary, and Sera told him stories about Velora, while Marcus sketched designs for structures that could support her world's incredible forces. And sometimes, when they were alone in her reinforced quarters, Sera would dance for him, moving with a grace and power that took his breath away. Finally able to express herself without fear. "You know what's funny?" Sera said one evening, as they watched the stars go by through the viewport. "What's that?" Marcus asked. He was sitting on the floor, leaning against the reinforced wall, while Sera lay on her cushion a careful distance away. They'd learned each other's boundaries, the comfortable spaces they could share. "When I first came here, I thought the reinforcement plates were a reminder of everything wrong with me. Every time I saw those black lines in the floor, I thought about how different I was, how dangerous, how much I didn't belong." She turned to look at him, her silver hair spilling across the cushion. "But now when I see them, I think about the fact that someone took the time to calculate exactly what I needed. Someone engineered a space where I could exist safely. Someone cared enough to build supports." Marcus smiled. "Engineers are good at that. Building things that hold weight. You're good at it," Sera corrected. "You're good at seeing weight not as a problem, but as something that deserves support." She paused, then added softly, "You're good at seeing me. You're easy to see," Marcus replied. "You're kind of unforgettable." Sera laughed, that musical sound he'd come to love. "Smooth talker." "I try," Marcus said. Then more seriously, "Are you happy here, Sera? Really? Happy?" "I know it's not home." Sera considered the question, her expression thoughtful. "Home is where you don't have to calculate every movement, where your body fits the space, and the space fits your body, where you can be fully yourself without fear." She met his eyes. "I thought that could only be Velora, but I'm learning that maybe home is more about the people who understand you than the gravity you're standing in." "That was surprisingly poetic," Marcus said. "I've been reading your Earth poetry, remember?" Sera replied with a smile. "It's rubbing off on me. Though I still think your poets have no idea what real weight feels like. Maybe you should write some poetry from a Veloran perspective," Marcus suggested. "Teach us about weight." "Maybe I will," Sera said. First line, "I am heavy, but I am not a burden." Marcus felt something catch in his throat. "That's perfect," he said quietly. "That's exactly right." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars, existing together in a space that had been carefully engineered to hold them both. Marcus thought about the first time he'd seen those reinforcement plates, how confused he'd been, how they'd seemed like a mystery to solve. Now he understood. They weren't just structural necessity. They were a promise that everyone deserved a place where they could rest peacefully, where their weight, whatever it was, would be supported. Everyone deserved a floor that wouldn't give way beneath them. 3 months later, Marcus submitted a proposal to the station council for a new habitat ring, one designed from the ground up for multi-species occupation, with adjustable gravity sections and modular reinforcement systems. It was approved unanimously, and Sera was asked to consult on the Veloran requirements. They worked on it together, late into the station's night cycles, designing spaces where different beings could coexist safely and comfortably. It was engineering, but it felt like more than that. It felt like building a future where weight, in all its forms, could be born with grace. And sometimes, when they took a break from the technical drawings and load calculations, they would sit together in Sera's quarters, close but careful, sharing tea and stories and the comfortable silence of two people who had learned to trust each other completely. Marcus would look at the reinforcement plates beneath them, those thick black lines that had started this whole journey, and he would think about how the strongest structures were the ones built to hold unexpected weight, to support forces that seemed impossible, to create safe spaces for beings who had never quite fit anywhere else. "What are you thinking about?" Sera would ask, seeing the expression on his face. "Just that I'm grateful for good engineering," Marcus would reply. And Sera would smile, understanding exactly what he meant, because she was grateful for it too. For the reinforcement plates that let her rest peacefully. For the careful calculations that made closeness possible. For the human who had looked at her weight not as a flaw, but as a fact deserving of support. For the home they were building together, one structural beam at a time. strong enough to hold them both. The stars wheeled on beyond the viewport, and in the reinforced quarters of Habring 3, two beings from different worlds sat together in the space that engineering and trust had created, proving that even the heaviest weights could find a place to rest, as long as someone cared enough to build the right supports. And somewhere in the station's engineering bay, the next generation of reinforcement plates were being fabricated, ready to hold whatever came next, because that's what good design did. It anticipated need. It created space. It held fast when the weight bore down. It said, without words, you belong here. You are safe here. Rest peacefully here. And in the end, that was all anyone really needed. A floor that wouldn't give way. A hand that held on carefully. A heart that understood the difference between weight and burden. Marcus had watched them nap peacefully and wondered why the floor needed reinforcement plates. Now he knew. It was so that beings who had spent their whole lives being careful, being afraid of their own strength, being unable to truly rest, could finally close their eyes without fear. It was so that someone who weighed half a ton but had the gentlest soul could sleep like anyone else, peaceful and safe. And that, Marcus thought, was the best thing he'd ever helped build.